The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Delilah Nash knelt in the dry Texas earth, her weathered hands pressing dark soil around the stems of wildflowers she had carried 3 miles from the creek bed. And even though sweat traced lines through the dust on her face, she refused to stop until every forgotten soul in this abandoned cemetery had something beautiful growing over them. Jefferson, Texas, in 1878 was a town that had seen better days. Once a thriving port on the Big Cypress Bayou, it had been the second largest city in the entire state before the railroad passed it by. Now it hung suspended between prosperity and decay, and nowhere was that more evident than in the old cemetery on the eastern edge of town, where graves from the cholera outbreak of 1867 lay neglected and overgrown with weeds. Delilah had made it her personal mission to tend these forgotten plots. At 24 years old, she had already buried a husband killed in a steamboat accident and a stillborn daughter, and something about these nameless graves called to her heart. Every Sunday after church, and most evenings after her shift at the general store ended, she came here with whatever flowers she could find or afford, planting them carefully, speaking quiet words to people whose names had worn off their wooden markers years ago. She was working on a grave near the back corner, one that had sunken lower than the others and bore no marker at all, when she heard the distinctive jingle of spurs approaching. Delilah did not look up immediately, focused on getting the roots deep enough that the flowers might actually survive the brutal Texas heat. "That is a mighty fine thing you are doing, miss." The voice was low and rough, like whiskey poured over gravel, and when Delilah finally glanced up, she had to shield her eyes against the sun to see him properly. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block out the light. His hat was pushed back just enough that she could see dark hair and eyes the color of creek water after a storm, gray-green and utterly serious. "These folks deserve better than to be forgotten," Delilah said simply, turning back to her work. She had learned over the years that most people who wandered into cemeteries wanted to be left alone with their grief, and she imagined cowboys were no different. "Reckon that is true," the man said, but he did not walk away. Instead, she heard him kneel down beside her, and when she looked over in surprise, he was examining her handiwork with genuine interest. "Wildflowers will do better than cultivated ones in this heat. Smart choice." "I learned that the hard way," Delilah admitted, sitting back on her heels. "Lost a whole batch of roses my first summer doing this." The cowboy reached out and tested the soil around one of her plantings with careful fingers. "Ground is pretty hard here. You water them, when I can haul enough from the creek. But mostly I just plant things that can survive on their own once they take root." He nodded slowly, then looked directly at her for the first time with those storm-colored eyes. "Name is Lucas Everett. I just signed on as foreman at the Rockingham Ranch, couple miles north of town." "Delilah Nash," she replied, wiping her dirty hand on her already dusty skirt before offering it to him. His handshake was firm but gentle, and his palm was calloused in the way that spoke of years of hard work with horses and rope. "Mrs. Nash?" Lucas asked, and there was something carefully neutral in his tone. "Widow Nash," Delilah corrected. "Going on 3 years now." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes that might have been sympathy or understanding or both. "I am sorry for your loss. Thank you." She had said those words hundreds of times, but somehow when this stranger said them, they did not feel quite so hollow. "Were you looking for someone specific? I know most of the graves here, even the ones without proper markers anymore." Lucas shook his head slowly. "No, I was just riding past and saw you working. Made me think about all the places I have been, all the folks I have known who ended up in graves nobody tends anymore." He paused, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he was not sure he should say. Seems like dying is easy enough, but being remembered takes someone who cares. Delilah felt something catch in her chest at that observation. That is exactly why I do this. My mama used to say that as long as someone speaks your name and tends your resting place, you are never truly gone. Your mama sounds like she was a wise woman. She was, Delilah agreed quietly. She is buried over there under that oak tree. That was back before the cemetery got forgotten when people still cared about this place. Lucas stood and walked over to the oak tree, studying the grave beneath it. Unlike the others, this one was impeccably maintained, with a proper stone marker and flowers blooming in careful rows. Marigolds, he observed. Those were her favorites. How did you know? He turned back to her with something that was almost a smile. Because you planted them like you were arranging them for her to see, not just for anyone passing by. That is how you plant for someone you love. Delilah felt tears prick at her eyes unexpectedly. 3 years of tending this cemetery, and nobody had ever understood what she was doing here until this stranger with storm-colored eyes and a voice like rough whiskey. Lucas seemed to realize he had touched something tender, because he shifted his weight and cleared his throat. Listen, I know we just met and you have got no reason to trust me, but I meant what I said about what you are doing here being mighty fine. And I was thinking, while I was watching you work, that you are planting flowers on ground that does not want to let anything grow. You are fighting hard earth and harder weather, trying to make something beautiful happen where everyone else has given up. That is a fair assessment, Delilah said slowly, not sure where he was going with this. Lucas walked back over to her, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped even lower, intimate and earnest. Thing is, you could plant roots somewhere that wanted to let you bloom. Somewhere the ground was softer and the water ran easier. You are putting all this care into graves when you could be putting it into life. Delilah stood up, brushing dirt from her skirt, feeling something like anger kindle in her chest. These people deserve care, Mr. Everett. Just because they are dead does not mean they do not matter. I am not saying they do not matter, Lucas said quickly, holding up his hands. I am saying you matter too, and watching you work yourself into exhaustion trying to bring life to death, well, it makes a man wonder if maybe you have forgotten that you are still living. The words hit harder than Delilah wanted to admit. She opened her mouth to deliver a sharp retort, but Lucas kept talking, his voice gentler now. I am putting this all wrong, he said, frustration creeping into his tone. What I am trying to say is that you have got a gift for making things grow, for tending and caring and bringing beauty into hard places. And maybe instead of spending all that on the past, you might consider spending some of it on the future. Your future. My future is just fine, thank you, Delilah said stiffly. Lucas looked at her for a long moment, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Is it? Because from where I am standing, it looks like you are burying yourself right alongside all these folks you tend. You do not know anything about me, Delilah said, but her voice came out less sharp than she intended. You are right, I do not, Lucas agreed, but I would like to. And I would like to show you something if you will trust me enough to take a ride. Delilah should have said no. Every practical bone in her body knew that getting on a horse with a strange man was foolish, even if he did have kind eyes, and a way of saying things that struck right to the heart of her. But something in her was so desperately tired of being practical, of being the grieving widow who lived more with the dead than the living. Where would we be riding to? She asked cautiously. There is a place about an hour north on Rockingham land. I want to show you what I mean about planting roots where the ground wants to let you grow. Delilah looked back at the grave she had been tending, at all the other graves still waiting for her attention. then at her mother's resting place under the oak. She could almost hear her mama's voice saying that the dead would still be dead tomorrow, but opportunities for the living did not wait around forever. "All right," she said finally, "but I need to be back before full dark. People talk, and I have got a reputation to maintain." Lucas's face broke into a genuine smile, and it transformed him completely. "Yes, madam, I will have you back with time to spare." He helped her onto his horse, a big roan gelding with a calm disposition, and swung up behind her. Delilah tried not to notice how solid he felt at her back, how his arm came around her waist to hold the reins, careful to maintain proper distance, but still close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through her dress. They rode north out of Jefferson, following the old wagon road until Lucas turned off onto a narrower trail that wound through pine trees and over small, rolling hills. The land here was greener than around the cemetery, fed by springs that kept the ground moist even in the heat of summer. "Rockingham has some of the best water in the county," Lucas explained as they rode. "Old man Matthews, who owns it, knows how lucky he is. He treats his land right, does not overgraze, lets sections rest and recover." "You sound like you care about more than just the cattle," Delilah observed. "I grew up on a farm in Tennessee," Lucas said. "Before the war, I mean. My pa taught me that land is not something you take from, it is something you partner with. You treat it right, it will treat you right back." "What brought you to Texas?" She felt him tense slightly behind her. "War took most everything we had. Pa died at Shiloh, my brother at Stones River. Mama held on for a few years after, but her heart was broken. After she passed, there was not anything left for me there but ghosts and debt." "I am sorry," Delilah said softly, understanding in a way that perhaps only someone who had also lost everything could understand. "We all got our losses," Lucas said. "Difference is whether we let them bury us or whether we find a way to keep living." Before Delilah could respond to that, they crested a hill and she gasped at what lay before them. The hillside was absolutely covered in wildflowers, more varieties and colors than she had ever seen in one place. Blues and purples and yellows and whites spread out like a living quilt, moving gently in the evening breeze. "How is this possible?" she breathed. Lucas dismounted and helped her down, his hands steady on her waist. "This is what I wanted to show you. Nobody planted these. They just grow here because the conditions are right. The soil is good, the water is plentiful, the sun hits just perfect. This is what happens when things are allowed to bloom where they are meant to." Delilah walked into the field of flowers, unable to stop herself from reaching out to touch the delicate petals. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." "It is," Lucas agreed, but when she looked back at him, he was not looking at the flowers. He was looking at her. Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. "Mr. Everett, I am not sure what you are suggesting." "I am suggesting that maybe you have been planting yourself in hard ground for too long," Lucas said, walking toward her slowly. "I am suggesting that there are places and people that would let you bloom if you gave them the chance. I am suggesting that I would very much like to be one of those people." "We just met," Delilah protested weakly. "We did," Lucas agreed. "And maybe I am crazy for saying all this so soon. But I have been drifting for near about 10 years now, working one ranch after another, never putting down roots because nowhere felt right. Then I saw you in that cemetery, fighting to make flowers grow in impossible conditions, and something just clicked into place for me." He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough that she could see the absolute sincerity in his storm-colored eyes. "I am not saying I know everything about you or you know everything about me, but I am saying I would like the chance to find out. I am saying that if you would consider planting roots with me, I would do everything in my power to make sure you could bloom forever. Delilah's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "That is quite a proposal, Mr. Everett. Call me Lucas, please." He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to step back, and when she did not, he gently tucked a loose strand of her dark hair behind her ear. "And I am not proposing marriage, not yet anyway. I am just asking if you would let me court you proper. Let me show you that there is more to life than tending graves and living in the past." "I do not know if I remember how to live in the present," Delilah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then let me remind you," Lucas said softly. "One day at a time, one moment at a time. Starting right now in this field, with these flowers and this sunset and the possibility of something new." Delilah looked around at the wildflowers surrounding them, at the way they grew thick and healthy without any effort or struggle, just because the conditions were right. She thought about the cemetery where she spent all her time, about the hard ground and dying flowers and constant battle against the elements. She thought about her mama's words about remembering the dead, but also about living while you could. "All right," she said finally. "Yes, you can court me. But I am not giving up the cemetery. Those folks still need tending." Lucas's face broke into that transformative smile again. "I would not ask you to, but maybe you could let me help you tend them. 2 sets of hands would make lighter work, and then you would have more time for other things. For living things. You would do that. Help me with the cemetery. Delilah, I would do just about anything if it meant spending time with you." She laughed, surprising herself with the sound. It had been so long since she had laughed like that, genuine and light. "You are either the sweetest man I have ever met or completely crazy." "Probably some of both," Lucas admitted with a grin. "Now come on, let me show you the spring before we have to head back." He took her hand, large and calloused and warm, and led her through the flowers to where a small spring bubbled up from between rocks, forming a clear pool before trickling away to feed the hillside. The water was so clean Delilah could see every pebble at the bottom. "This is the heart of it all," Lucas said. "Everything grows from here. The water feeds the land feeds the flowers, and it all just keeps going, season after season." Delilah knelt by the spring and cupped her hands in the cool water, drinking deeply. It tasted sweet and clean. Nothing like the silty water from the bayou or even the creek near the cemetery. When she looked up at Lucas, standing there with the sunset turning everything gold around him, she felt something shift in her chest, like a seed that had been dormant for years finally deciding to sprout. "Thank you for showing me this," she said. "I think I needed to see that beautiful things can grow without so much struggle." "Everyone needs reminding of that sometimes," Lucas said, sitting down on a rock beside the spring. "I know I did. Spent years thinking I had to fight for every inch of ground, had to prove myself everywhere I went. Then I came here and Matthews told me something I will never forget. He said that fighting and working are not the same thing. Fighting is what you do when you are in the wrong place. Working is what you do when you are in the right place, and it should feel more like partnering than battling." "That is wise," Delilah said thoughtfully. "He is a good man. Lost his wife about 5 years back, understands what it is like to grieve, but he also understands that life keeps going and you can honor the dead while still living for yourself." Delilah stood and brushed off her skirt. "I should get back. It is getting late." Lucas checked the sun's position and nodded. "You are right. I promised to get you back with daylight to spare." The ride back to Jefferson was quieter than the ride out, but it was a comfortable silence. Delilah leaned back slightly against Lucas's chest, letting herself enjoy the simple pleasure of human contact after so long alone. His arm around her waist felt protective rather than presumptuous, and she found herself wishing the ride could last longer. When they reached the edge of town, Lucas slowed the horse. I should probably let you off here, save your reputation from too much gossip. Delilah knew he was right, but she felt a sharp pang of disappointment. When will I see you again? I could come to the cemetery tomorrow after you close the store, help you with your planting if you want the company. I would like that, Delilah said, and meant it completely. Lucas helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering on her waist just a moment longer than necessary. Until tomorrow, then, Delilah Nash. Until tomorrow, Lucas Everett. She watched him ride away, then walked the remaining distance into town, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. Mrs. Henderson was sweeping her front porch and gave Delilah a curious look. But Delilah just smiled and waved, not caring for once what the town gossips might say. That night, lying in her small room above the general store, Delilah thought about wildflowers growing on a hillside and a cowboy with storm-colored eyes who said he wanted to help her bloom. She thought about hard ground and soft ground, about fighting and working, about tending the dead and living for herself. And for the first time since James had died, she let herself imagine a future that was not just duty and grief and endless maintenance of the past. The next morning, Delilah woke before dawn as usual, but instead of feeling the familiar weight of another day to get through, she felt something almost like excitement. She dressed carefully, choosing her second-best dress instead of her usual work clothes, and pinned her dark hair up neatly. Mr. Patterson, who owned the general store, raised his eyebrows when she came down the stairs looking so put together. "You have got a glow about you today, Mrs. Nash. Something I should know about." Delilah felt her cheeks warm but kept her voice casual. "Just looking forward to the day, Mr. Patterson. Is that so unusual? For you?" "A bit, yes," he said, but not unkindly. "You have been walking around like a ghost yourself for too long, if you do not mind me saying. Nice to see some life back in your eyes." The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Delilah measured out flour and sugar, helped Mrs. Chen pick fabric for a new dress, restocked shelves and counted change, all while watching the sun make its slow arc across the sky. Every time the door opened, her heart jumped, hoping it might be Lucas, even though she knew he had said he would come to the cemetery. Finally, blessedly, 6 o'clock arrived and Mr. Patterson told her to go on home. Delilah changed quickly into her work dress, grabbed her gardening tools and the packet of seeds she had been saving, and hurried toward the cemetery. Lucas was already there, waiting by the gate with his horse tied to the fence post. He had changed too, she noticed, into a clean shirt, and he held his hat in his hands as she approached. "I was not sure what to bring," he said, gesturing to a burlap sack sitting on the ground beside him. "So I brought a shovel, some extra tools, and a couple canteens of water from the ranch spring. Figured everything grows better with good water." Delilah felt something warm bloom in her chest. "That was very thoughtful. I have got seeds for bee balm and black-eyed Susans. They should do well here if we can get them established." They worked together as the evening light softened and cooled, falling into an easy rhythm. Lucas dug the holes while Delilah planted the seeds and patted down the soil, and they used the spring water sparingly to give each planting a good start. They talked while they worked, sharing stories about their childhoods, their families, the paths that had led them to this cemetery in Jefferson, Texas. Delilah learned that Lucas was 27, that he had a sister in Tennessee who wrote him letters sometimes, that his favorite food was apple pie, and he could not stand the taste of parsnips. He told her about learning to ride horses when he was 5, about the time he broke his arm falling out of a tree, about the way his mother used to sing while she cooked breakfast. In turn, Delilah told him about growing up in Jefferson, about her father who had died when she was 12, About meeting James at a church social and thinking he was the handsomest man she had ever seen. She told him about the stillborn daughter, about the way grief could swallow you whole if you let it, about finding purpose in tending these forgotten graves. "You still love him?" Lucas asked quietly as they worked on a grave near Delilah's mother's plot. "Your husband, I mean." Delilah sat back on her heels, considering the question carefully. "I will always love who he was and what we had together, but I am not in love with a ghost anymore, if that is what you are asking. I think I finally let him go about a year ago, really let him go. I just did not know what to do with myself after that." "And now?" Lucas asked, his gray-green eyes steady on her face. "Now I think maybe I am starting to figure it out," Delilah said softly. Lucas reached over and brushed a smudge of dirt off her cheek with gentle fingers. "I am glad I found you, Delilah Nash. Or maybe that you found me. However it worked." "Me too," she whispered. They finished planting just as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lucas walked Delilah back toward town, leading his horse beside them, and they talked about when they might see each other again. "There is a church social on Saturday," Delilah said. "If you wanted to come as my guest." "I would be honored," Lucas said. "Though I should warn you, I am terrible at dancing." "That is all right. I am not much better. We can be terrible together." Lucas laughed, rich and warm. "That sounds like a fine plan to me." They parted at the edge of town again, and Delilah walked home with a smile on her face and dirt under her fingernails. Mrs. Henderson was on her porch again, but this time Delilah did not even care about the curious look. Let the town talk. She was tired of living her life according to what other people thought she should be doing. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Lucas came to the cemetery most evenings, and they worked together on bringing the forgotten graves back to life. Some evenings they talked constantly, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Other evenings they worked in comfortable silence, just enjoying each other's presence. On Saturday, Lucas came to the church social dressed in his best clothes, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished. Delilah wore her good blue dress, the one she had not worn since before James died, and she saw Lucas's eyes widen when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "So do you," Delilah replied, then laughed. "I mean handsome. You look very handsome." They did dance, and they were indeed both terrible at it, which somehow made it even more fun. They stepped on each other's feet and lost the rhythm and laughed until Delilah's sides hurt. The town matrons watched with mixed expressions of approval and concern, but Delilah's friends Sarah and Emma came over afterward to tell her how happy they were to see her smiling again. "He seems like a good man," Sarah said, watching Lucas go fetch them cups of punch. "Different from James, but good in his own way." "He is," Delilah agreed. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again." "What way?" Emma asked with a knowing smile, like the future might be something to look forward to instead of just something to get through. When Lucas returned with the punch, he asked if Delilah might want to take a walk outside where it was cooler. They strolled through the church grounds, and Lucas told her about his week at the ranch, about a particularly stubborn mare he was training, and the new calf that had been born, and how Old Man Matthews had complimented his work. "He said if I keep doing this well, he might consider making me a partner in a few years," Lucas said, and there was careful hope in his voice. "Part ownership, a real stake in the place." "Lucas, that is wonderful," Delilah said warmly. "It made me think about the future in a way I have not in a long time," Lucas continued. "Made me think about putting down real roots, building something that lasts. Made me think about you." Delilah's breath caught. "Oh." Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I know it has only been a few weeks. I know people will say I am moving too fast." But Delilah, when you have spent as many years as I have just drifting through life, you learn to recognize when something feels right. And it feels more right than anything has in my entire life. It feels right to me too, Delilah admitted. It scares me sometimes how right it feels. Why does it scare you? Because I already lost one person I loved. Because I know how much it hurts when they are gone. Because opening my heart again means risking it breaking again. Lucas brought her hands up and kissed her knuckles gently. I cannot promise I will never die, Delilah. None of us know how long we have got. But I can promise that whatever time I do have, I want to spend it making you happy. I want to help you bloom like those wildflowers on the hillside. I want to be your good ground and your fresh water and your sunshine. And I want you to be all those things for me too. Delilah felt tears slipping down her cheeks, but they were not sad tears. How do you always know exactly what to say? I do not, actually. Most of the time I am terrified I am going to say the wrong thing and mess this up. But with you, I just say what is in my heart and hope it is enough. It is enough, Delilah whispered. It is more than enough. Lucas cupped her face in his hands and looked at her with such tenderness it made her chest ache. Can I kiss you, Delilah Nash? Yes, she breathed. Please. His lips were soft and warm against hers, gentle but sure, and Delilah felt like she was falling and being caught at the same time. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring 3 years of loneliness and grief and gradual healing into that moment. And he held her like she was precious, like she was worth everything. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. I am falling in love with you, Delilah. I think I started falling that first day in the cemetery. I am falling in love with you too, Delilah confessed. And it is terrifying and wonderful, and I do not want it to stop. Then it will not stop, Lucas promised. I am not going anywhere. They walked back to the social hand in hand, and if the whole town saw them, Delilah did not care. She was done hiding her heart away, done living in the shadows of grief. Lucas was right. It was time to plant roots in good ground and let herself bloom. Over the following months, Lucas courted Delilah properly. He took her on picnics by the bayou, brought her flowers from the hillside, came to Sunday dinner at her boarding house, and charmed her landlady, Mrs. Morrison, completely. He helped her tend the cemetery faithfully, and slowly but surely, the forgotten graves began to look less forgotten. Flowers bloomed where there had only been weeds, and the wooden markers that could be saved were cleaned and restored. Delilah met Old Man Matthews and his daughter Claire, who welcomed her warmly to the ranch. Matthews told her that Lucas was the best foreman he had ever had, and that if she married him, she would be getting a good man. Not trying to rush you, Matthews said with a wink, just stating facts. As summer faded into fall, Lucas asked if Delilah would ride out to the wildflower hillside with him one Sunday afternoon. The flowers had gone to seed for the season, but the hillside was still beautiful, golden with dried grasses and the last stubborn blooms hanging on against the cooling weather. Lucas spread out a blanket and they sat watching the sun arc across the sky, talking about everything and nothing. Finally, when the light was just starting to turn golden, Lucas shifted to face her. Delilah, there is something I want to ask you, and I have been trying to figure out the perfect way to say it for weeks now, but I think I just need to be honest and speak from my heart. Delilah's pulse quickened. All right. Lucas took both her hands in his, just like he had that night at the church social. When I met you, I was just drifting, existing but not really living. You changed that. You reminded me what it feels like to care about something beyond just the next job or the next town. You gave me a reason to put down roots and build a real life. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. I made this myself, so it is not fancy, but it is real and it is from my heart. Delilah Nash, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you plant roots with me and bloom forever? Delilah opened the box with shaking hands. Inside was a simple gold band with a small chip of turquoise set into it. Oh, Lucas, it is perfect. Is that a yes? Lucas asked, hope and nervousness warring in his expression. Yes, Delilah said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Lucas whooped with joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until they both collapsed onto the blanket, laughing. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, catching the afternoon light. I love you, Delilah. I love your strength and your kindness and your stubborn determination to make flowers grow in impossible places. I love how you honor the past while still reaching for the future. I love everything about you. I love you too, Lucas. I love your gentleness and your wisdom and the way you see straight into my heart. I love that you understand both grief and hope. I love that you want to help me bloom. They lay on the blanket in the dying light, holding each other and making plans for their future. They would marry in the spring, Lucas said when the wildflowers came back. They would live at the ranch in the foreman's house, which had plenty of room to grow. And they would keep tending the cemetery together, because the dead deserved to be remembered even as the living moved forward. When they rode back to town that evening, Delilah kept looking at the ring on her finger, hardly believing this was real. She had thought that part of her life was over, that she would spend her remaining years alone with her grief and her flowers. But Lucas had shown her that hearts could heal, that new love did not erase old love but grew alongside it, different but just as real. The town received the news of their engagement with general approval. A few of the older matrons clucked about proper mourning periods, but most people were genuinely happy for Delilah. Sarah and Emma immediately began planning, talking about dresses and decorations, and where the ceremony should be held. In the cemetery, Delilah said firmly. Under the oak tree by my mama's grave. She always said she wanted to see me married again, wanted to know I would not be alone. I want her to be there in whatever way she can be. Lucas agreed immediately. That sounds perfect. And maybe afterward we can plant something new there, something to mark the beginning of our life together. The winter months passed in a flurry of preparations. Delilah sewed her dress with help from Emma and Sarah, simple white cotton with lace at the collar that had belonged to her mother. Lucas worked extra hours at the ranch, saving money and preparing the foreman's house for a wife. They spent every moment they could together, learning each other's rhythms and quirks, building the foundation for their life together. On a mild day in April, when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom again, Delilah Nash married Lucas Everett under the oak tree in the cemetery she had tended for so long. The graves around them were no longer forgotten, but bright with spring flowers, a testament to her faithful care and the partnership she had built with the man who now slipped a matching gold band onto his own finger. The ceremony was small, just a few close friends and ranch hands, with the circuit preacher reading from a worn Bible. But when Delilah looked into Lucas's storm-colored eyes and promised to love him through whatever came, she meant it with every fiber of her being. And when he promised the same to her, she believed him completely. After the ceremony, they planted a rose bush beside her mother's grave, one that Lucas had ordered special from a nursery in Houston. It was the kind that would grow hardy and strong, that would bloom year after year with minimal care. A symbol of enduring love, he said, and a promise to both Delilah and her mother that he would tend and cherish this family, living and dead. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with Old Man Matthews providing beef and beer and letting them use the big barn for dancing. This time when Delilah and Lucas danced, They were still not very good at it, but they did not care at all. They laughed and spun and held each other close, and Delilah felt so full of joy she thought she might burst with it. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Lucas took Delilah's hand and led her to the foreman's house that was now their home. He had spent the last week fixing it up, painting the walls and repairing the shutters and making sure everything was perfect. "Welcome home, Mrs. Everett," he said, sweeping her up into his arms and carrying her over the threshold. Delilah laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I never thought I would have this again. A home, a husband, a future worth looking forward to." "You have got all of that and more," Lucas promised, setting her down gently in the front room. "You have got me for as long as we both shall live. And I have got you, which makes me the luckiest man in all of Texas." That night they made love for the first time, tender and careful and full of wonder. Delilah had been nervous, worried that it would feel like a betrayal of James, but when Lucas touched her with such reverence and care, she felt only gratitude and joy. This was not a replacement for what she had lost. It was something entirely new, a second chance at love that honored what came before while still being wholly its own thing. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Lucas traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "I am thinking about that first day in the cemetery, when you said I was fighting hard ground trying to make things grow. I am thinking about how you were right, but also about how that fight was not wasted. It taught me that I was strong enough to try again, that I had not lost the ability to nurture and care and hope. It prepared me for this for you." Lucas kissed her forehead. "I am thinking about how I spent 10 years looking for a place to call home, and I did not find it in any town or any ranch. I found it in you. You are my home, Delilah. Wherever we are, as long as we are together, that is home to me." "That is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me," Delilah whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks again. "I will spend the rest of my life saying beautiful things to you," Lucas promised. "And I will spend it helping you bloom, watching you grow and thrive and become everything you are meant to be." The first year of their marriage was full of adjustments and discoveries. Delilah learned the rhythms of ranch life, getting to know the other hands and their families, learning to cook larger meals and manage a household that was more than just her small room above the store. She still worked part-time at the general store, and she still tended the cemetery twice a week, but now she had Lucas by her side for both. Lucas threw himself into his work with renewed purpose, knowing he was building something for their future. Old man Matthews made good on his promise and drew up partnership papers, giving Lucas a percentage of the ranch and guaranteeing him a share of the profits. It was not a huge amount, but it was a start, a foundation they could build on. In their second year of marriage, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified at first, remembering the stillborn daughter and all the grief that had come with that loss. But Lucas held her and reminded her that every pregnancy was different, that this baby would be their own story, not a repeat of the past. "We are planting new seeds," he told her, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "In good ground with plenty of water and sunshine. This baby is going to grow strong and healthy. I can feel it." Delilah wanted desperately to believe him, and as the months passed and her belly grew round and the baby kicked vigorously, she began to let herself hope. Lucas was attentive and careful, making sure she did not overwork herself, bringing her wildflowers from the hillside and rubbing her aching feet in the evenings. Old man Matthews gave them a cradle that had belonged to his own children, and Claire organized a quilting bee to make blankets. Sarah and Emma came out to the ranch regularly, bringing supplies and encouragement and excitement. The whole community seemed invested in this baby, this symbol of new life and second chances. On a cold January morning in 1881, with snow falling gently outside and Lucas pacing nervous holes in the front room floor, Delilah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's dark eyes, and when he cried his first breath, Delilah sobbed with relief and joy. "Look what we made," she whispered to Lucas when he finally came in to meet his son. "Look at this perfect little person." Lucas took the baby with shaking hands, staring down at him with absolute wonder. "He is beautiful. He is perfect. Oh, Delilah, we made a whole person." They named him James Lucas Everett, honoring both the past and the present, and from the moment he entered the world, he was loved fiercely. Lucas was a devoted father, getting up for night feedings and changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor for hours when the baby was fussy. Delilah had never loved him more than when she watched him with their son, so gentle and patient and full of wonder. As James grew, they took him to the cemetery with them, letting him play among the flowers while they tended the graves. Delilah told him stories about his grandmother and his namesake, making sure he understood that remembering those who came before was important, but so was living fully in the present. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Rose Marie, named for the rose bush they had planted on their wedding day. She had Lucas's gray-green eyes and a stubborn streak a mile wide, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from day one. Life on the ranch was full and good. Lucas continued to excel in his work, and Matthews increased his partnership percentage twice. They added rooms to the foreman's house as their family grew, building with their own hands the space they needed. Delilah eventually stopped working at the general store to focus on raising the children, but she never stopped tending the cemetery. It was part of who she was, her way of honoring the past while embracing the future. The children grew up understanding that their mother had loved before, had lost before, but that none of that diminished how much she loved them and their father now. They learned that hearts were big enough to hold multiple loves, multiple stories, multiple lives worth of memories and hopes. When James was 5 and Rose was 3, old man Matthews passed away peacefully in his sleep. His daughter Claire inherited the ranch, but immediately made Lucas a full partner, recognizing that he had been running the place alongside her father for years. It gave the Everett family security and stability they had only dreamed of. At Matthews's funeral, held in that same cemetery that Delilah had been tending for over a decade now, she looked around at all the graves she had cared for so faithfully. Most of them had proper flowers now, and the whole place looked peaceful and loved rather than forgotten and abandoned. It was a testament to persistence and care, to the idea that nothing was too broken to be tended back to beauty. That evening, after the children were asleep, Delilah and Lucas sat on their front porch watching the stars come out. Lucas had his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth, still marveling sometimes that this was her life. "I was thinking today about that first time we met," Delilah said softly, "about how I was so focused on the dead that I had stopped really living. About how you saw that and offered me something different." "You offered me something different too," Lucas said. "You showed me that caring for things mattered, that tending and nurturing was not weakness but strength. You taught me how to put down roots." "We saved each other," Delilah realized. "No," Lucas corrected gently. "We chose each other. We both had to do the work of healing and growing ourselves, but we chose to do it together, and that made all the difference." Delilah thought about that, about how she had spent years after James's death tending graves and flowers, slowly healing herself through the act of caring for others. About how Lucas had spent years drifting, learning who he was and what he wanted. about how they had both been preparing themselves without knowing it for the moment they would meet. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. Taking a chance on a widow in a cemetery, Lucas pulled her closer and kissed the top of her head. "Not for one single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Delilah Everett. You and those babies sleeping inside this ranch, this life we have built together. It is everything I never knew I needed." "You told me to plant roots with you and bloom forever," Delilah said, remembering that first conversation, the wildflower hillside, the way he had seen straight into her heart. "I think we did that. I think we are still doing that." "We are," Lucas agreed. "And we will keep doing it for the rest of our lives. We will tend our marriage like you tended that cemetery, with care and patience and stubborn determination. We will raise our children to be good and strong and kind. We will build something that lasts, that matters, that makes the world a little more beautiful." Over the following years, they did exactly that. They had one more child, a boy they named Matthew after Matthews, and they raised all 3 children to be compassionate and hardworking. They continued to tend the cemetery together, now bringing their children along to help, teaching them about service and remembrance. The ranch prospered under Lucas and Claire's joint management, becoming known throughout Texas for quality cattle and ethical practices. They employed fair wages and good working conditions, and the ranch attracted the best hands in the region. Delilah started a small garden behind their house, growing vegetables and flowers and teaching her children how to nurture living things. The garden became something of a local attraction, people coming from miles around to see the riot of color and abundance that she coaxed from the Texas soil. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas took Delilah back to the wildflower hillside where he had proposed. The children stayed with Claire for the night, giving them rare time alone together. They spread out a blanket in the exact spot where he had asked her to marry him and watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. 10 years, Delilah marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. Both of those things are true, Lucas said, pulling her close. Every day with you feels new and exciting, but also like coming home to something I have always known. Do you remember what you said to me that day you proposed, about planting roots and blooming forever? I remember every word I have ever said to you, Lucas replied, but especially those words. We did it, Delilah said softly. We planted roots in good ground and we bloomed. We are still blooming, and I think we always will be as long as we keep tending each other the way we tend everything else we care about. Lucas kissed her, slow and deep and full of 10 years of love and partnership and shared life. I love you, Delilah Everett. I loved you the moment I saw you fighting to make flowers grow in that cemetery. I loved you when you agreed to marry me. I loved you when you gave me our children. And I will love you every single day for the rest of my life. I love you too, Delilah whispered against his lips. You saved me, you know. Not from anything specific, but from a half-life of grief and duty and forgetting how to hope. You reminded me that I deserved to bloom too. They made love there on the hillside under the stars, and it was different from their wedding night, but just as meaningful. This was the love of partnership and history, of shared struggles and shared joys, of 2 people who had chosen each other every single day for a decade and would keep choosing each other forever. As they lay tangled together afterward, Lucas pointed up at the stars. You think they are watching? Your mother, your first husband, all the folks in the cemetery, Delilah considered that. I think if they are happy for us. I think they want us to live fully and love deeply and make the most of the time we have. That is what I would want if I was watching from wherever comes next. That is what I want too, Lucas agreed. And that is what we are going to do. We are going to live and love and keep blooming until our own time comes. And then maybe someone will plant flowers on our graves and tell our story, about how a lonely widow and a drifting cowboy found each other and built something beautiful. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and milestones, and the steady accumulation of a life well lived. James grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who wanted to study law. Rose became a skilled horsewoman who could outride any of the ranch hands. Matthew inherited his mother's gift for making things grow and spent hours in the garden. Lucas and Delilah grew older together, their hair graying and their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and good living. But they never stopped tending the cemetery, never stopped bringing flowers to the forgotten graves. It was their ritual, their way of honoring how they had met and what it had meant. On their 20th anniversary, the whole town threw them a party at the church. People came from all over the county to celebrate the couple who had become something of a local legend. The widow who tended graves and the cowboy who offered her hope, who had built a family and a thriving ranch, and a love that everyone could see was genuine and deep. During the speeches and toasts, Claire stood up and told the story of how Lucas had come to work at the Rocking M, how he had been skilled but restless until he met Delilah. She gave him roots, Claire said, and he gave her permission to bloom again. Together they proved that second chances are real, that love can find you even in the most unexpected places, and that tending each other with care and patience is the secret to a lasting marriage. Delilah cried happy tears and held Lucas's hand tight under the table. He brought her knuckles to his lips and kissed them, just like he had done at the church social all those years ago when they were just beginning. That night, lying in their bed in the house they had expanded and improved over 2 decades, Delilah traced the lines of Lucas's face in the moonlight. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had just ridden past that cemetery that day? If you had not stopped to talk to me? Lucas caught her hand and held it against his cheek. I try not to, because it is too sad to imagine. I would probably still be drifting, still looking for something I could not name. I would have missed out on you, on our children, on this whole beautiful life. I cannot even conceive of that kind of emptiness anymore. I would have kept tending graves, Delilah said quietly. I would have been fine, I suppose. I had purpose and work and a place in the community. But I would not have had joy. I would not have had love. I would not have had you and everything you brought into my world. Then I am grateful every single day that something made me ride past that cemetery at exactly the right moment, Lucas said. Call it fate or God or just dumb luck, but I will never stop being thankful for it. Me either, Delilah whispered. Me either. Their children grew up and started families of their own. James married a smart, kind woman named Patricia and became a lawyer in Dallas, but came home often to visit. Rose married one of the ranch hands, a good man named Thomas, and they built a house on ranch land, staying close to home. Matthew took over the garden and expanded it into a small nursery business, selling plants and flowers throughout the region. Lucas and Delilah became grandparents, then great-grandparents, and the house that had once held just the two of them became filled with the chaos and joy of multiple generations. Sunday dinners were loud, raucous affairs with children running everywhere and adults talking over each other and love permeating every corner. The cemetery remained a constant in their lives. Even as their bodies aged and the work became harder, they continued to tend it faithfully. Their children and grandchildren often joined them, learning the stories of the people buried there, understanding the importance of remembering those who came before. On their 40th anniversary, Delilah was 70 and Lucas was 73, and they were still deeply in love. Their bodies were weathered and worn, but their hearts were as strong as ever. They celebrated quietly this time, just the two of them and their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch. Matthew had planted a special garden for the occasion, filled with every type of wildflower that grew in Texas. It was spectacular, a riot of color and life that took everyone's breath away. In the center, he had placed a stone marker with an inscription that Lucas had helped him write. Here bloomed a love that started in a cemetery and grew to fill a lifetime. Delilah and Lucas Everett, who taught us all how to plant roots and bloom forever. Delilah cried when she saw it, holding Lucas's hand tight. "It is perfect," she whispered. "Everything is perfect." "It is," Lucas agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "We built something good, Delilah, something that will last beyond us," and they had. Their legacy was not just in the ranch or the children or the garden, or even the cemetery they had tended for decades. It was in the example they set of what love could be when it was nurtured with care, when two people chose each other every day and worked together to build something beautiful. Lucas passed away peacefully in his sleep at 76, with Delilah beside him holding his hand. His last words were, "Thank you for blooming with me." Delilah's heart broke, but she did not shatter. Their children surrounded her with love, and she found comfort in knowing that they had done everything they had promised each other. They had planted roots in good ground. They had bloomed forever, for all the days they were given. She buried him in the cemetery, of course, in a plot she had been saving for them under an oak tree not far from her mother's grave. She planted wildflowers over him, the same types that grew on the hillside where he had proposed. And she visited him every single day, talking to him about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch and the town and everything that had grown from the seeds they planted together. Delilah lived for 3 more years after Lucas passed, years filled with her family and her garden and her faithful tending of the cemetery. She never stopped caring for the forgotten graves, even though most of them were no longer forgotten thanks to her decades of work. She never stopped telling the story of the cowboy who had stopped to talk to her one day and changed her entire life. When Delilah passed away at 73, surrounded by 3 generations of family who loved her, her last thought was of Lucas waiting for her, ready to show her new fields of wildflowers in whatever came next. She was buried beside him, and their children planted a rose bush between their graves, one that would grow and bloom year after year, a living symbol of the love that had started in grief and grown into something magnificent. The cemetery that Delilah had tended so faithfully became something of a local treasure, maintained now by her children and grandchildren and the whole community. People came from all over to see the graves that were no longer forgotten, to hear the story of the widow and the cowboy who had fallen in love among the flowers and the headstones. Years later, decades later, when visitors walked through that cemetery and saw 2 graves under the oak tree with a thriving rosebush between them, they would read the inscription on the shared marker, Delilah and Lucas Everett. She was planting flowers on forgotten graves. He said, "Plant roots with me and bloom forever." And they did. And around those graves, wildflowers bloomed thick and healthy every spring, growing without effort in ground that had been tended with such care and love that it could not help but produce beauty. The flowers spread year by year, covering more of the cemetery, transforming it from a place of sorrow to a place of remembrance and hope. Their great-grandchildren brought their own children to the cemetery, teaching them about Delilah and Lucas, about the importance of tending what you love, about how second chances are real, and how love can find you even in the most unexpected places. The story became part of the town's folklore, a reminder that beauty can grow anywhere if you are willing to do the work of planting and nurturing and caring. The ranch prospered for generations, passed down through the family with the same principles of partnership and ethical treatment that Lucas and Claire had established. The garden Matthew had started became a thriving business that supplied plants throughout Texas. And the cemetery remained a place of beauty and peace, a testament to one woman's determination to make sure no one was forgotten, and one man's wisdom in recognizing that care as something precious. On the 100th anniversary of when Delilah and Lucas had first met, the town of Jefferson held a special ceremony at the cemetery. Descendants of the Everett family came from all over the country, along with people whose own ancestors had been helped by Lucas and Delilah over the years. They gathered under the oak trees, surrounded by flowers, and told stories about the couple who had proven that love could bloom even in the hardest ground. The mayor unveiled a new historical marker telling their story, and a local artist had created a bronze sculpture near the entrance to the cemetery. It showed a woman kneeling in the earth with flowers in her hands and a man standing beside her, and the plaque beneath it read, "Dedicated to Delilah and Lucas Everett, who taught us that tending the past and embracing the future are not opposing forces, but complementary acts of love. May we all find ground good enough to let us bloom." As the ceremony ended and people laid fresh flowers on the Everett graves, a soft wind blew through the cemetery, stirring the wildflowers and making them dance. And if you believed in such things, you might have imagined you could hear laughter carried on that wind, the sound of two people who had loved deeply and well, who had built something beautiful together, who had planted roots in good ground and bloomed forever, just as they promised. Their story became the kind that mothers told daughters and fathers told sons, a reminder that life could surprise you, that love could find you when you were not looking for it, that caring for others was never wasted effort. It became a story about hope and healing, about partnership and persistence, about the courage it takes to open your heart again after it has been broken. And every spring, when the wildflowers bloomed thick and bright over the graves in Jefferson's old cemetery, people remembered. They remembered the widow who refused to let anyone be forgotten, and the cowboy who saw her fighting hard ground and offered her something better. They remembered that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the most unlikely beginnings, and that love, real love, the kind that lasts, requires the same care and attention as any living thing. You have to tend it, water it, give it room to grow. You have to plant roots in good ground and then do the daily work of making sure those roots go deep and strong. Delilah and Lucas Everett had understood that. They had lived it every single day of their marriage, and in doing so, they had created something that outlasted them both. Not just children and grandchildren, not just a successful ranch or a beautiful garden or even a well-tended cemetery. They had created a legacy of love, a story that reminded everyone who heard it that second chances are real, that broken hearts can heal, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply care for something other than yourself. In the end, that was their gift to the world. Not grand gestures or great wealth, but the simple, profound act of loving each other well and tending everything they touched with patience and care. They proved that anyone could bloom if they were planted in good ground, if they were given the water and sunshine they needed, if they were cared for by someone who saw their potential and helped them reach it. She was planting flowers on a forgotten grave when a cowboy told her to plant roots with him and bloom forever. And she did. They both did. And in doing so, they showed everyone who knew them what love could be when it was done right. When two people chose each other every single day and worked together to create something beautiful and lasting and true. Their story ended the way all stories eventually must, with death and memory and the passing of time. But the love they built together, the family they raised, the ground they tended so carefully, all of it continued long after they were gone. The wildflowers still bloomed every spring. The rosebush between their graves still thrived. And people still came to the cemetery to pay their respects, to hear the story, to be reminded that love is always worth the risk, that caring is never wasted, and that beauty can grow anywhere if you are willing to do the work of planting and nurturing and believing in the possibility of bloom.